coalition to end sexual violence. And there are some really profoundly significant stories to be told. The groups and advocates who are closest to this issue of sexual violence are in the best position to tell those stories. But I am here at Union Station because of a national effort that has to be mounted to make Uber and Lyft safer. I have written last month, September 25th, to both Uber and Lyft, asking them to do better against sexual assault and violence that are happening because they are failing to take sufficient steps to make their riders safe. It's really that simple. What we've seen over the past year or so are repeated reports of sexual assaults that are disregarded or treated dismissively by Uber and Lyft, and a failure to take sufficiently strong and stringent steps to protect their riders. And here today at Union Station and many other facilities around the state of Connecticut and the country, everywhere in Connecticut and our country today, people will call Uber and Lyft because they feel it is safer often than driving themselves. Uber and Lyft have a trust responsibility to those riders, particularly women, who call them because of safety and are betrayed when Uber and Lyft fail to do background checks, fail to treat seriously reports of sexual assault, fail to take preventive action like sharing information about predators who have been even convicted while driving their cars, fail to share information with law enforcement. And I am demanding that Uber and Lyft take important steps after these repeated reports of sexual violence to make sure there are fingerprint background checks, that information is shared between them when riders complain about drivers, and share information with law enforcement immediately so that additional sexual assaults are prevented. What we've seen in Connecticut, twice in Fairfield County, are drivers who've been convicted what we've seen in Connecticut and the rest of the country are drivers who've been convicted continuing to drive or kicked out of one service and accepted by another, a culture of excessive leniency, 3 strikes policy, a failure to take seriously driver complaints. And these reports are absolutely heartbreaking and gut-wrenching when individual women are assaulted brutally and violently, betrayed. And this kind of excessive leniency, a culture of, in effect, looking the other way, has to be stopped. I will give you just one quote from the global head of women's safety for Uber, who said, "At the end of the day, we're not the judge and jury to determine whether a crime has occurred. We're here to gather information, make a business decision." Sexual assault is not a business decision. Sexual assault is a crime. It has to be stopped by Uber and Lyft drivers. It has to be reported, and it has to be taken seriously by Uber and Lyft as a matter of simple justice. And that's what we're asking them to do That's why I have written to both of them asking for action. We have not yet received a response. The measures that these companies have taken so far have been abjectly inadequate. They've instituted background checks, for example, but they don't include fingerprints, Uber's background check. They still do not share information with each other. So these measures taken so far have been minor and inadequate, and that's why we are demanding stronger, stiffer action. And I'm proud that we've been joined by the Coalition to End Sexual Violence.
Good morning, thank you. Thank you so much to Senator Blumenthal for your leadership on this issue, and I'm so pleased to have the Coalition standing with you this morning. The Senator has been a long-standing ally to the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence and has worked tirelessly, both in Connecticut and nationally, to ensure that the rights and dignity of survivors of sexual violence remain intact. With more than 90 million monthly Uber users alone, most of us have come to depend on ride-hailing apps just to get where we're going. Whether we're getting a ride to the airport when we're traveling or we're getting a ride home after an evening out with friends, we expect to arrive safely at our destination. Sexual violence should not be a consequence of getting a ride. While most reports, and recent reports, have highlighted the scope of the problem nationally, we in Connecticut have been working with survivors impacted by Uber and Lyft's lack of action for years. Our hotline staff have taken calls from women harassed and violated by drivers who then drop them off at their homes, at their workplaces, or at their schools. Our sexual assault crisis advocates have met survivors in emergency departments directly following being sexually assaulted by drivers. And our post-conviction victim services advocates, who work collaboratively in each of our state's sex offender supervision units, have provided support to victims whose offenders were ride-hailing app drivers, who they then trusted to get them home safely. While companies like Uber and Lyft purport that they lack the resources to fully address the complaints they receive from riders, it is only the company's lack of prioritizing the safety of its consumers that stands in the way. We're in support of the measures that Senator Blumenthal proposes and think that these will help tremendously. Creating transparent processes for removing unsafe drivers, improving background checks, and as the Senator has said, including fingerprinting across the board, the sharing of information across platforms about banned drivers, and the addition of more specifically trained human staff, not digital staff, but human staff, to address the complaints and field the complaints of riders. These steps will significantly and immediately increase the safety of all riders, as well as decrease the likelihood that dangerous drivers will remain on the road. The impacts of sexual violence last a lifetime. It's time for Uber and Lyft to make meaningful changes and take responsibility to ensure its drivers are not using the platforms to prey on vulnerable riders just trying to get where they're going. If you have been impacted by sexual violence and need information, advocacy, or any other kind of support, you can reach us at the Alliance or our 9 community-based sexual assault crisis service centers at endsexualviolencect.org. And again, I really want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Senator Blumenthal for his leadership on this issue and on all of the issues that impact survivors of sexual violence, both here in our state and across the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? I'm sorry? The simple answer is there are no comprehensive, reliable statistics, in part because Uber and Lyft doesn't want to know. Their attitude is that less knowledge is better for them. Fewer statistics enhance their position. So they are not a great source of numbers. But we do know, for example, from CNN, that last year at least 103 drivers were accused of sexual assault. There were 31 drivers convicted of crimes working for Uber or Lyft, ranging from forcible touching to rape. In Connecticut, for example, last July, 2 instances of sexual assault were reported in Fairfield County, one in Stamford, the other in Fairfield, one involving an Uber driver with multiple convictions, the other a Lyft driver who had been banned from Uber. And there are probably many others. The point here is that these sexual assaults are often reported to Uber and Lyft, and they bury them. the survivor often counts on Uber and Lyft to report them to law enforcement. And of course, the victim and survivor often is reluctant to go to law enforcement directly without encouragement or at least some kind of support from Uber and Lyft, because they have no information about the identity of the driver or other details. And sometimes they call Uber and Lyft because they are intoxicated, as they should, rather than driving. That's the reason why Uber and Lyft say that often it's safer to ride with them if the rider has been drinking, for example, or otherwise needs the safety of a hired driver. Now, Uber has adopted a policy that says, in effect, that the driver has to look at the passenger so that the rider can make sure that the driver's not impersonating somebody else. But that's not a background check. And the background checks that they do not involve fingerprints, as the taxi driver checks do. So that's why I say Uber and Lyft have basically adopted practices that are best for their business, but not for their riders. In effect, looking the other way, doing their best to minimize or dismiss the problem, rather than confronting it directly and honestly. All set? Thank you.
Sure. Beth Hamilton, and I'm the BETH is the first name, Hamilton, HAMILTON, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Really.
It's always a pleasure. Can we take one picture?